Hi, I'm Dick Rauscher. I am the founder, editor, and writer of the Stony Hill newsletter. Today we're going to be talking about building healthy and happy relationships with other people. Healthy and happy relationships with others is often difficult for us because we spend most of our adult lives under the control of a powerful alien presence. I think that's probably the best way to say it. This alien presence is the unconscious, narcissistic, primitive ego of our inner child. Now, this is the part of our psyche that we used and developed when we were very little to cope with a complex and very overwhelmingly confusing world. A world that could be downright dangerous, or feel dangerous at least, when we were little. That part of our psyche still resides inside all of us. What we don't realize is that that part of our psyche is still in control. And it is especially in control when we feel threatened or overwhelmed, or if we're overtired. Any of the things you can think about that would be associated with children. If children are frightened, they become angry, they become aggressive. Well, that's exactly what our primitive ego does when we're under stress. It's important to remember, however, that the primitive ego is not bad. I only use the word primitive in the context or in the sense that it is young, it's primitive, it's early, it's undeveloped. It's that part of our ego that is very, very young. And by that I mean anywhere from 18 months to maybe 5 or 6 years old. But we must remember that the primitive ego of our inner child is very powerful, far more powerful than most of us realize and understand. It often makes us do things that we regret. It makes us do things that are not in our best interest, for sure. And especially, it gets in the way of our relationships with other people. Because it's young and immature, our primitive ego tends to be self-focused. It tends to be rather narcissistic. And it is very focused on its own wants, needs, desires, fears. It has very little ability for empathy, and it has very little ability to understand another person's point of view. It is interested primarily in its own comfort, its own pleasure, its own sense of safety. Some other things that are important to know about the primitive ego is that it's very invested in always being right. The primitive ego maintains safety and a sense of well-being by insisting that it has the right answer. To say that another way is that we can say that the primitive ego can get really angry if it's criticized. If someone tells us we're wrong, and I'm sure we've seen this in other people, if someone is criticized, it's not uncommon for that person to get angry quite quickly. And if we're really honest with ourselves, we can probably find that same behavior in ourselves. So one of the things to remember about primitive ego is that it has a very strong black and white sense that it's right, and anything or any opinion that disagrees with the primitive ego is labeled as wrong. And of course, if it's wrong, it's the enemy. The aggression and the anger that comes when we're criticized is really a very primitive or childish defense of our opinions that we think we're right. Our primitive ego also gets angry if we feel like something that belongs to us, something that is ours, something that we're entitled to, has been either withheld from us or has been actually taken away from us. Another area where the primitive ego will get quite angry is if another person assumes that their needs and their wants and their opinions or their ideas are more important than ours. Not just wrong. In other words, they're not just criticizing us, but they're saying that their needs and wants and rights are more important. That will very quickly connect with our primitive ego, and again, we will tend to manifest or project a lot of aggression and anger. Now, we may not project it all the time. Sometimes it's held inside, but that's how we feel. And it's pretty easy to pick that up in another person. I mean, you know when another person's angry, whether they're saying they're angry or not, you know that. The body language gives us away. If someone tells us what to do or tells us to do something that we really don't want to do, the moment that happens, again, we're back to our anger and our aggression, and it may come out as a passive-aggressive, it may be very quiet, but it is aggressive. We don't like being told what to do, especially when we don't want to do it. So what's important today as we wrap up here on our discussion about building healthy relationships is to recognize we may look like matured, mild-mannered, civilized adults on the outside, but when we're overwhelmed emotionally, or when someone or something challenges us or stresses us internally, our self-focused primitive ego will very quickly and very aggressively take control of our psyche. When that happens, it's almost certain that we are going to become aggressive and conflict is going to enter our lives. There's almost no way to stop it. If we want to create happiness in our relationships with others, we first have to learn to become more self-aware. And by that, I mean we have to become more intentionally self-aware. We have to learn to pay attention to the behaviors that we're putting out into the world. We have to become more aware of the choices we're making. In other words, do we want to act on a feeling, or we just want to pay attention to the feeling and still control the kind of behaviors that we put out into the world? As we pay attention, something very miraculous happens. After a while, what will happen is you'll begin to pay attention to them easier and easier. You'll see them more clearly. And when that happens, they won't make as much sense. We will begin to recognize that these are not behaviors that are helpful for us. They're getting in our way. They're creating hurt and conflict in our relationship with other people. And like a snake shedding its own skin, we'll begin to change. And that change, and this is the key, the change will then be effortless. We don't have to work at it. Just pay attention. You'll see your primitive ego. And when you do, you'll begin to change the way you interact with the world. It's inevitable. You can't stop that growth either. If you want healthy relationships, the key, become self-aware. And the key there probably is to become intentionally self-aware. This is not something you can do casually. You have to intentionally make a commitment that you are going to become self-aware of the behaviors that you put out into the world. And when you do, you will begin to change. And when you do, your relationships will become much less conflicted and a lot happier.